Can I say a controversial opinion real quick? Yeah, that's good with you? Okay, cool. As a big Splatoon fan, I've always preferred playing the campaigns more than playing online. Even though Splatoon is considered to be an online multiplayer game, every installment has such an engaging and well-thought campaign that I feel like it's overlooked quite often. And with the release of Side Order, I thought it was a good time to take an extensive look and see how exactly they helped evolve the series ever since it launched all the way back in 2015. Well, all but one campaign helped to evolve the series, but I'll get to that part later. Unlike these other marathons I've played, Splatoon is a very interesting case in that I've actually played the majority of these campaigns already. Granted, that was a long time ago, but I still retain the memory of certain plot points and big events. So this marathon is not only gonna be about how good these story modes are, but also seeing how well they've held up in my eyes. But anyways, just getting to play Splatoon 1 was a bit of a journey in of itself, since the only way to play it is with the Wii U, and I don't happen to own one anymore, and pirating it was too much of a hassle, so I had to go through other means in order to play it.
You got the goods?
And after the tutorial and being introduced to the very simple but effective plot of the campaign, the first thing I took in was how good of a third-person shooter this game is, despite this being Nintendo's first attempt at making one. I don't know how controversial this will sound, but I believe that Splatoon has one of the best gameplay styles out of any Nintendo game. Every button and control stick feels perfectly mapped and tailored for Splatoon, and I have the most fun doing the simplest of things. It just feels so satisfying to shoot ink and refill ink very seamlessly, and I get a little sense of joy anytime I swiftly move through the ink path I created for myself. And there's also the fact that Splatoon has the best use of motion controls. Sure, Wii Sports was pretty novel for its time, and Mario Party 8 had a great jacking off minigame, but here, using the gyroscope to control your directions and movement has never felt more efficient and responsive. And instead of motion controls feeling tacked on and gimmicky, it feels natural and a necessary component to make Splatoon so much fun to play. But strictly speaking for the story mode, how does the gameplay translate there? Since a lot of the time, a game with a big multiplayer aspect barely tries to do anything offline wise. You do have some exceptions like the Smash games, which give out a lot of content for just one player, but nowadays most multiplayer games give a really bare bones experience or nothing at all. So it's nice to see the Splatoon devs cared about those who didn't have a Wi-Fi connection and also took the chance to develop the world of Splatoon through the story mode. First off, let's talk about the levels themselves and how they're an absolute blast to play through. Like, you immediately jump into a kettle, and right from there, the pace never slows down. You'll be constantly splatting, sliding up walls, jumping, and more within mere seconds of each other. And even though these are very simple movements, it'll always feel fun because of how fast the gameplay is. However, every level does feel a little bit formulaic since they all have a basic 3-act structure to them. The first act introduces a cool feature to interact with. Like in level 6, we're introduced to the propeller lift. In Act 2, we get to see how the propeller lift can impact gameplay and how it can be used to your advantage and disadvantage. And in Act 3, it's the final stretch to the Zapfish, which fully utilizes the propeller we learned how to use early on. Rinse and repeat, but you replace the propeller with sponges or geysers. And you would think that the process would get tiring, but I felt quite the opposite. Splatoon's naturally good controls paired up with these stylized levels make for such a good time. Despite there being a 3-act structure, you can fly by most of these levels in a little over 2 minutes, and the length of them also fits for Splatoon. Since most online matches don't last very long in the first place, all of these levels are indicative of how long you usually last in an online game. Of course, it's not like the shortness of them is a bad thing. All 30 levels have basically zero filler, and it's completely up to you how fast you want to play through them. And dying at any point doesn't feel like a big consequence since there are checkpoints all over the place. So if you happen to get splatted or fall 1,000 feet from the ground, you wouldn't get set back super far, so you'll never really be on any downtime. But that's also because the quote-unquote hub world the story takes place in feels like a gigantic level in of itself. Sure, the first world isn't much, but it really starts to open up as you get farther into the game, with worlds 3 to 5 literally becoming some sort of jungle gym as you try to find the hidden kettles located around it using some of the mechanics you learned in prior levels. And this kind of exploration only contributes to how there's a non-stop pace with this game. However, this quick pace leads the story mode to feeling incredibly short. I happen to 100% the entire thing in under 24 hours, but that also goes to show how much I was enjoying the story mode as well. or there's something wrong with me, either or. And these levels are pretty much one and done. Once you go through them, there's not much else to see besides obtaining all the sunken scrolls. These are sort of like the star coins of this game, with one in each level for you to find, and sometimes they can be in hard to find places and you really have to look through every nook and cranny to find them. But unlike other collectibles in games that sort of just tell you, wow, good job, you found the thing, the developers made it so obtaining sunken scrolls unlocks the hidden lore of the Splatoon world. And you can find these funny quips on its culture, their past, the huge war, and also the rituals of the squids. It's overall hilarious and very cute, like this passage right here. Why are we here? For what purpose do we exist? We must not dwell on these questions. We can merely trust in the will of the universe and spend our days and nights in harmony with the world, celebrating this festival called life. Yeah, this one really cracked me up. But other than the scrolls, there is pretty much no reason to go back to these levels. Likewise, as you approach the climax of the campaign, you start to take in how repetitive these levels can become, and they really start to lose some steam. Again, still fun to play through given how good the gameplay is, but you can tell they started to reuse a lot of ideas from before, and at some point you come to the realization that there's only like 5 common enemy archetypes in this game. Luckily, the campaign ends right before this becomes a really big issue, and the presence of Captain Cuttlefish and Agent 1 and 2 keep you going until the very end. And on that topic, other than the actual game-playing parts of Splatoon 1, I think the overall structure the world is set in is also well executed. Captain Cuttlefish is basically your guide through these levels, offering you assistance and gives you hints whenever you get stuck. He also doesn't shy away from making jokes from time to time. So the story mode is definitely a little bit more enjoyable with him here. And he's also better than fucking Cranky Kong. Midway through the game, Cuttlefish gets kidnapped by a mysterious presence and is replaced by Callie and Marie, who are secretly undercover as Agent 1 and 2. I definitely like their commentary a lot more than Cuttlefish, and overall they really bring more life into this already colorful world. Because let me just say, the world of Splatoon is incredibly stupid. In a good way. It's already pretty bizarre how this entire world's ecosystem revolves around squids shooting ink at each other, but there's a lot of other stuff you notice that makes you say, why? Why do you die when you fall into water? Why are levels located in teapot kettles? What's with this dude's legs? And a bunch of other stuff that doesn't make sense at all. But the best part about it is that the characters of Splatoon embrace the absurdity. They look at the weird legs guy and say, yeah, that's completely normal, which funnily enough only makes the world feel more believable since all the insanity that inhabits it is never questioned. I made an entire video about how inherently stupid the world of Splatoon is, so if you really want to watch me talk more about it, just go watch that. But anyways, on the topic of the weird legs boss, let's talk about the bosses in general, which are all mechanically powered by a Zapfish and are all very unique from one another. They all end with you splatting their tentacle tumor, but the process to reveal them are wildly different, and all require you to utilize a mechanic of your arsenal you've practiced with before. Overall, they are a great change of pace with how mundane the common enemies are, with their only problem being they are really easy. I guess this is a common issue throughout the entire game though, since I probably died less than 10 times during the entire campaign. And it does suck, since I love the concepts of the bosses and they only go down in 3 hits, which is why I wasn't super excited for the final boss, only to be blown away by how cool it is. DJ freaking Octavio, now this is how you do a final boss. Splatoon has always had a big emphasis on its music within the fandom and actual games themselves. So instead of having some big old generic meathead, we get a sick ass DJ, which couldn't be more perfect. The fight itself starts off a little tame. It becomes obvious that you need to counter his punches with your ink. And when I first played this game, I was so conditioned to land 3 hits on the boss and they perish, but thankfully that's not the case. The final boss is actually quite long and slowly changes as it gets more difficult. My favorite aspect of this boss is how you're constantly being taken to new environments as you're chasing down DJ Octavio, and the platforms underneath you are always changing. So not only are you fighting him, but you have to make sure to have enough room to dodge his attacks and not fall off the edge. And it's such a cool change after how generic the terrain in the other bosses are. And it seems as though you're not only fighting DJ Octavio, but the level itself. This boss is such a blast to play through, and even though this is his very first appearance, I already consider DJ Octavio one of the finest villains Nintendo has to offer. Okay, maybe he's not like Bowser or Ganon level, and I like King Dedede more than him as well, but King Boo? Yeah, I'd say he's cooler than him. And so DJ Octavio explodes and the Great Zapfish returns to Inkopolis. And I gotta say, Splatoon had a very solid starting point. It's really nothing too mind-blowing, and yeah, it's pretty rough around the edges considering what we have now, but I can tell a lot of heart went into making it. Especially at an age where multiplayer games didn't really think about those who didn't have an online connection. So on the glass, I'm filling it up to a little over the 6 to 6.5 counter. In 2015, this was a very promising series, so let's see if the momentum can continue. It didn't continue. So Splatoon 2's story mode. If there was one word I could use to describe my thoughts and feelings on my experience, that word would be conflicted. I will start to explain myself in a second, but first off, despite this game being 7 years old, it's still on the Switch, meaning there's still going to be some people out there who still play this game rather than its sequel. So I wanted to take a look at some of the messages from people who still play this game.
I got a Glock in my
Alright, that's enough of that. So the big hook Splatoon 2 has going for its plot is Callie has gone missing, and it's up to you to go find her with Marie, who will be your guide and commentator. And dude, back in 2017, I was so hyped to see what was going to happen. If you may not recall, the final Splatfest of Splatoon 1 had the theme of Squid Sister versus Squid Sister, and at the end of it, Marie came out on top. And fast forward to the trailers of Splatoon 2, you would see that Marie had a big role to play in it, and Callie was nowhere to be found. So the consensus was Callie was going to be some sort of villain or the main antagonist of the campaign, perhaps due to some sort of fallout between her and Marie, or maybe it had something to do with the Splatfest. Either way, Splatoon 2 opens up with a huge mystery and lots of intrigue, and I couldn't wait to see how the developers was going to expand on the plot as the game went on. Maybe this is my fault for getting so worked up about what to expect from the story mode, but I feel like the entire thing was such a missed opportunity. But before I get into all of that, let's talk about some positives. When I originally played this game, I thought it looked identical to its prequel, but now that I've played them back to back, Splatoon actually looks very nice visually and graphics wise compared to its prequel. The character models feel more detailed, the lighting on textures are pretty on point, and the ink especially looks really good, now having a glossy finish to it, which makes it look more authentic. I can only assume that Splatoon's success on the Wii U warranted its sequel to look even better in the quality department. You can now use other weapons in the story mode. It was kinda strange that Splatoon 1 offered such a unique array of weapons only to not be able to use any of them in the campaign. So having them all available here is pretty cool, and there's specific levels designed around their abilities. Upgrades are something that exists here. Ink rails are really cool. Did I mention that I really like Marie? Yeah, that's basically all I got. I'm not trying to say that everything else about it is horrible, but it's just the fact that Splatoon 2's campaign is basically the same as Splatoon 1's. Each area has a handful of levels in which they all revolve around a certain gimmick or mechanic and all have this same 3-act structure I mentioned before. However, no longer are levels 2 to 4 minutes long, and now they're 5 to 10 minutes long, which you know on paper should be a good thing, more bang for your buck. But as I said before, the reason why Splatoon 1's levels worked was because they were so short, mimicking how online matches wouldn't take too much of your time either. And now that they're elongated, it no longer fits that status quo. And trust me, some of these levels can go on forever. Like this one level where you gotta utilize a mini Gatling to shoot down these drumming things to move the platforms closer to you. Well, guess what, Splatoon 2? I don't like to fucking use the mini Gatling. But that doesn't matter now because I'm stuck with it. I've always been more of a melee, close combat kind of guy, so most of the time I like to use the roller and at the off chance the ink brush. And these levels based around those weapons are fun, but they barely show up. Literally, you don't even unlock the ink brush until the final area. Now I understand why this was made like this. For people who've never played Splatoon, or returning players can experience a new weapon they never tried out before to see if they like it. But we don't need a 10-minute level to prove that, because then you're just going to be forcing someone to use a weapon they don't want to use, and it would be a lot better if after you unlock the weapon for the first time, you get the option to whether or not you want to use it afterwards. But yeah, other than those things, the game plays almost exactly to Splatoon 1. You go area to area finding hidden kettles, and at the end you fight a big boss who's powered by a zapfish, and once you defeat them, you find out more about what's truly going on. And in this case, it's about Callie, and the whole intrigue about her whereabouts just turned into a carbon copy of Splatoon 1, but replacing Cuttlefish with her. And I know there's gonna be some people out there that feel as though I'm not giving Splatoon 2 enough credit. It's an online multiplayer game, what should I expect? And I understand that making a compelling story wasn't the main intention of the developers, but man, for how well Splatoon's gameplay translates into a single player experience, it's obvious that the potential is there for something really special. And what we got wasn't what I was looking for, but it's still pretty fun. The bosses, while they're still pretty simple, are fun to play through and take advantage of certain weapons in different ways. Like, come on, look at this toaster. That's utter genius right there. And I still love going around the world map and finding these kettles and talking to Marie, since it brings a lot of charm to the game. But it's just so similar to its predecessor and makes some pretty weird choices as a result. And makes me question whether those claims of Splatoon 2 being rushed were in fact true, since there was a pretty small release window from the end of Splatoon 1 to Splatoon 2. And those theories feel very plausible when you take a look at the climax of this campaign. So after finding out that Callie was indeed working with the Octarians and going to their home base, which looks very cool and super distinct from everything we've seen before, we reach the final boss of the game. And back then, I wasn't too impressed about everything I've seen so far, but I knew it could be all worth it if Nintendo nails the final boss this time around. Looking at how awesome and insane the final boss of the first game was, and then now we have the whole thing with Callie, I was expecting some kind of huge showdown. I know some of the other aspects were kind of underwhelming, but I was so ready for whatever crazy mind-blowing thing I was about to see. It's the same fucking thing from Splatoon 1. Oh! Literally a 1-for-1 remake of before, but now Octavio has some new bling. You gotta shoot the hands back to his face and dodge his attacks. But even more amazingly, Callie barely contributes at all and just chills on top of the robot the entire time. And even more amazingly, the boss removes one of the coolest aspects of the OG Octavio. Whereas the boss was constantly moving and you had to adapt to your surroundings, this boss takes place in the same fucking circle as all the other bosses, making it feel generic and uninspiring, just like the rest of the game. There is so much untapped potential, and it just feels so similar to what came before. But even with that, I still had a fun time with it. I know, I'm kinda gonna contradict everything I just said, but the vibes and atmosphere of this final showdown is incredible. It takes place in a dome with a huge audience, which gives it such a spectacle. And even though we didn't get that 2v1 I expected, I still found it really neat that Marie hops in and tries to break Callie's mind control with her own music. And as the boss continues on, you can see the ongoing turmoil for Marie as she tries to rekindle her relationship, and Callie fighting off her mind control and her own emotions, as we learned are pretty messed up after the events of Splatoon 1. And this is mostly shown through the music, as it seems like there's two entities clashing with one another. And then all that leads up to Callie finally breaking free, and the original Squid Sisters song starts to play, which leads to the last phase of the boss, which finally is something different from before, with you going around on ink rails shooting back Octavio's attacks, but this time with the Rainmaker. And honestly, this part reminds me a lot of the final battle in Super Mario Galaxy 2, where yes, it is insanely easy and ends very quickly, but you almost want to ignore that part because of how goddamn good everything else is. Ink rails are still one of the coolest additions Splatoon has ever made, and jumping back and forth trying to shoot Octavio is an exhilarating time, which all ends with the final clash, placing the Rainmaker onto Octavio, thus ending the story mode of Splatoon 2. And my thoughts on the campaign can be summed up by the final boss. It borrows a ton of ideas from its prequel and makes some interesting and not so fun changes that make me super conflicted. I still had fun with the entire thing, no doubt, but I also found myself asking a lot, why? Why did they keep this and why did they change that? And wondering what could have been if the developers had more time to work on it. But as it stands, it's an acceptable experience. One that I want to give a higher score than Splatoon 1, but I can't since Splatoon 1 is more original, thus getting a lower score on it on the glass. However, one thing I've always found pretty neat is if you return to the final boss after you beat the game, you'll find that Callie has been mind controlled again. And the in-game canon reason for why she has them back on is because she thought she looked really cool in sunglasses, which is so stupid. Who would wear sunglasses inside for the sole reason of thinking they look cool in them? Yeah, couldn't be me. Longtime viewers of the channel are pretty well aware that I've never played Octo Expansion before, and I've never explained why. Until now. The truth behind the matter is, I don't know why either. Yet for some reason, 15-year-old me just never bothered to play through it. Like, I watched the trailers when they first came out. It looked like a fun time, but I guess paying $20 for it was too expensive for me, I don't know. Well, I remain pretty spoiler-free since then, so I was amped to see if I truly missed out on anything back then. So as the game entails, we play as an Octarian who lost our memory and now has to team up with Cuttlefish, as we've somehow gotten lost and wound up on this underground train station, and now we have to find our way back up to the surface, which automatically sets a very distinct tone from the other story modes that we come across so far, since instead of a bright blue sky and endless terrain, we're confined to the dark and claustrophobic subway station. Octo Expansion also opens up with a ton of questions as well. Where did Agent 3 go? Why are other Octarians attacking me? How do we get out? Who is this pile of sludge and why does he look so weird? Oh, wait, sea cucumber. That's pretty smart, actually. But everything else still stands. Questions that make Octo Expansion have a very engaging start, and answers I hope to find out later on. But as for right now, Octo Expansion works in a very different way compared to what came before, with the levels being much more confined and getting straight to the point, which means they are much shorter than before, with some of them literally taking under a minute, which worried me at first since Octo Expansion could have been too short just for me to find out that there's over 80 levels in this game. But also levels feel too loose of a term, and instead they act more so as mini challenges, all of them having one idea and rolling with it till the end. In the past two story modes, the levels there would also start off with some sort of mechanic, but the developers would squeeze absolutely everything out of it by the end, meaning some levels went on for far longer than they should have and got very drawn out. But here, if the developers have an idea for a level, they use it immediately and move right on to the next one. But now levels can be more creative than ever before, and you can never expect what challenge you're gonna face next. One level would have you make one shot and be over afterwards, and the next level will have you conserve your ink to the best of your abilities before you reach the end of the level. This will allow devs to have absolutely zero limits when designing them and will make their ideas shine. But perhaps my favorite part about these levels is how they restrict you. When you enter a stage, the game will tell you a certain task you need to complete in order to reach the end. And there's a huge range at what kind of task the game will give you. For example, get the 8 ball all the way to the end without it dropping, make sure you destroy all the right boxes, and get to the end of the level with only using curling bombs. And this not only makes me play more smart and not carefree like I usually tend to do, but also makes the game a lot more difficult. And not like, oh no, this challenge will take me a lot longer than usual, but make it harder as in, if you accidentally mess up, you'll fucking blow up. But to be honest, I've been playing Splatoon for about 9 years now, so obviously for me, these levels weren't too hard to get by. Yeah, the difficulty spike was the quite well needed surprise. I don't know who at Nintendo said, "Alright, fuck Splatoon fans," and decided to punish us, but it made the whole experience much more engaging. And on top of that, we're given the option in almost every level to choose what weapon we want before we go in. And here you can tell which weapons would make a challenge harder or easier at the expense of your reward. So if you do go with the easier option, you wouldn't get as many CQ points as you would with a harder weapon. So basically, it's high risk, high reward, and it's such a necessary change compared to all the base Splatoon 2 story mode lost talk you into only using one weapon. Which is also funny since this inadvertently made me like certain weapons more than I did before. Like, I physically groaned whenever I had to play through a 10-minute charger level, but here if I get a bigger reward, I will 100% choose the charger every time. So not only are the levels amazing, but everything else about the DLC is great as well. Especially since it takes full advantage of its subway setting, with the player unlocking levels through different lines, which are constantly intersecting with one another. So while you may start off pretty bare, eventually the more levels you play, the more lines you unlock, which can look a little convoluted, but to me is such a great addition. Sure, I guess it's a little less immersive than the jungle gyms that the original story modes had, but it takes advantage of the environment Octo Expansion takes place in, and it was such a blast hopping from different lines in order to get further. And obviously with the subway feature, we can go ahead and explore other subway cars as well, talking to Captain Cuttlefish or taking a look at the wide variety of sea creatures lurking around in the subway. And I thought that some of the character designs looked wacky enough in the base game, but I was not prepared for what some of these guys looked like.
What the fuck am I looking at? And why am I kind of turned on?
So even though I said I went super blind into Octo Expansion, there was one tiny detail I knew going into it, and that was Pearl and Marina would play a big role in it. And I was pretty excited for this, because other than the fact that I'm pretty sure that they're gay for each other, I knew next to nothing about them. And at first, I was disappointed that we didn't actually get to see them at all, and instead we only communicated through the phone until I saw their chat logs. Basically, after completing a set amount of levels, we get the chance to look at their group chat messages with Cuttlefish, and man, I did not know it would be this much fun to read. They have such great chemistry and text as though they're real people talking about real things. Plus, we get to find out a lot more about Pearl and Marina's history together and how exactly they became music stars, which is adorable. And within the levels themselves, Pearl and Marina not only provide commentary, but even give you the option to completely skip levels if you're having that hard of a time with it. Which, god, some of these levels can take such a long time and are aggravating, so giving us the option to skip it entirely was much appreciated. If you were a bitch. Yeah, there's no fucking way I'm gonna wuss out and skip any of these levels. No matter how hard these levels get, I will never take the easy way out. And so I continued to grind through all the levels, and the further I progressed, I never saw any signs of burnout or repetitiveness, which only goes to show how unique all these levels are. But what I did notice was clear stagnation in the actual plot. Early on, I mentioned how hyped I was to see all the answers to my questions when I first started Octo Expansion. And the further I got, I realized that nothing really story-based happens until the very end of it. Which not only sucks because we have to wait such a long time for it to happen, but it also can feel very rushed. The whole point of running around completing all these levels was so we can collect these 4 things called Thangs. Wow, that is a real sentence I just said. In which this telephone dude was saying would bring us back to the surface, only to betray us and almost blend us up. In which we are finally saved by Agent 3 at the last second. And a couple of things about this. First, where was Agent 3 this whole time? Second, basically all that trouble to find the things were pointless. And third, what is going on? Everything happened very quickly and none of it was foreshadowed beforehand. Which I guess I shouldn't complain about because it's a Nintendo game, but it just felt so rushed and out of place. And I would have liked if all these events were slowly built up instead of happening all at once. Whatever though, after these events we're transported to the final stretch of the game in which we face a gauntlet of challenges in a final effort to get back to the surface. And this is a great climax. It's a good transition from how quick the levels in Octo Expansion were and gets you hyped up for what's to come at the very end of the game. And after a long and arduous journey, we reach the surface and we're met with the final challenge. Apparently the mastermind behind all of this is this guy Tartar, and his evil plan was to wipe out the entire world with this big old machine. Again, I don't love how he and his whole plan seemingly came out of nowhere and has little to no explanation or correlation to what we were playing in Octo Expansion. And also Tartar looks like a green piece of shit, but the whole confrontation is pretty cool. You finally get to see Pearl and Marina in action, and you're given the order of splatting his entire machine before the timer runs out. And this feels very in tune for what Octo Expansion has been so far, and the music here sets the scene very well. And once you do your part, Pearl finishes up with one final killer whale, and you are responsible for saving the world, thus ending with the Octarians finally coming at peace with the squids and living in harmony, capping off with a beautiful end credit scene. And for as much as I loved Octo Expansion, I was a little disappointed at how easy and simple the final boss was, if I could even call it that. Like, there are some hard levels in the DLC, and to end it off like that didn't leave the best taste in my mouth, but hey, it is what it is. And as a whole, Octo Expansion— God fucking damn it, we're not done yet. I did not know this existed in the game. I literally went back to Octo Expansion to make sure I didn't miss anything, just to find out there's one more boss in the game, and it happens to be the hardest shit ever. Once completing the main story and every level, there is one more secret boss waiting for you, which is called the Hidden Mind of Agent 3. And if I were to sum it up, in this boss, we are the fodder and Agent 3 is the main character. He has access to literally every ability, weapon, and special, and all you have is a weak little gun, and you're expected to go against this overpowered god with basically nothing. I know the same type of boss technically happened a little bit earlier, but I refrained from talking about it because this is basically that boss on steroids. 5 phases, all very different from one another, in which you have to escape all of Agent 3's attacks in this tiny ass square with nowhere to go. And when I say you have no time to rest, you don't, as every second that passes, you are either getting shot at, bombed, dodged, paralyzed, or running, and you have to be on your game. Any false moves and you die. And I'll say it again, it almost seems like Agent 3 is cheating with how many tools he has at his disposal while you only have a measly gun, and I struggled endlessly. I write an extensive amount of notes as I play through these marathons so I can go back to them when I write these scripts, and this is literally all I put when I played this boss. Oh dear God, what the fuck is the hero within? My hands ache from trying to beat it. God, why is this so hard? Why am I doing this to myself? I should consider therapy. And after all that suffering, by the skin of my teeth, I somehow pulled it off. And despite almost breaking my hands, I couldn't be happier that this secret boss was included in the DLC. Not just because it was difficult, but for what it means for the bigger picture of Octo Expansion. For the entirety of the story mode in Splatoon 1 and 2, the squids were up against the Octarians, and throughout the story mode, you'd always come across Octarians that feel vastly inferior to squids, with you being able to take them out in no time. And before, we didn't think much about it. They're the enemy, why should we care? But now through Octo Expansion, we know that the Octarians are just like us, and this boss right here gives such a good perspective to what it felt like to be a pushover like the Octarians we used to fight from before. But now, they can be much stronger than that, and through willpower and a lot, and I mean a lot of failed attempts, they can be just as strong as some of the best squids, and no longer feeling like the villain, but the hero they've always knew they could be from within. And as a whole, Octo Expansion was such a joy to play through, taking the gameplay we all love and expanding upon it in ways we've never seen before, and creating such an amazing experience that prior campaigns can barely hold a candle to. Although I couldn't fully appreciate the genius of the developers, since I played Splatoon 3 beforehand, which works very similar to this, and I found the story to be a little bit disappointing, this was still a phenomenal experience that truly elevates Splatoon as not just an online shooter, which is why I put it around an 8.5 on the glass. And if I had the chance to, I would go back in time and tell 15-year-old me how big of a dumbass he was for not playing it earlier. In this game, you have a pet salmonoid named Little Buddy. So back when this game first came out, I wasn't super excited for it. I might have been a little bit burnt out from the series at that point, but frankly, I didn't know how much Splatoon 3 would change from Splatoon 2, since they were on the same console. But when I went to GameStop, the guy at the counter told me, and I quote, "Yo, this game is sick," and I guess that was enough to drop $80 on it. I can't remember what my expectations were like back in 2022, but after settling in, I noticed that Splatoon 3 felt eerily similar to the first two. You plop yourself into the manhole and you're greeted by Captain Cuttlefish, who yet again tells you that the Octarians are back and the great Zapfish is gone. And then he sends you off to complete levels that you're already used to seeing. And even though this is everything I didn't want the game to be, you can tell from the beginning that something feels off. These levels have little to no enemies in them, and when they do, they look off. Where did all of this brown ooze come from, and what's with the weird sandy setting the campaign resides in? Something strange was going on, and it all came to a full stop when we first see DJ Octavio. And it's only then you realize that, oh, the developers completely know what they're doing. They knew a lot of the fans complained about how similar Splatoon 2's campaign was to Splatoon 1, and as a little bit of a prank, the game starts off continuing that trend with slight hiccups here and there. The DJ Octavio boss here plays like a beta version of his other appearances, but it's here you not only realize that Octavio wasn't gonna be the main antagonist this time around, but also there's something bigger going on around here that's not just getting the great Zapfish back. And that's confirmed after the fight where the ground underneath explodes out of nowhere and you are sent tumbling down the hole, in which the actual campaign of Splatoon 3 begins. This was such a neat subversion of our expectations, and it's nice to see that the developers acknowledge their own faults and use that to make a more entertaining story out of it. Once getting sent down there, we're no longer in Splatsville, and instead the campaign takes place in Alterna, and we're accompanied by Callie, Marie, and Agent 3. Oh, no, not again. And after finally playing the campaigns in chronological order, the inclusion of Agent 3 makes a lot more sense compared to when I first played the game. Since back in 2022, I never knew that Agent 3 came back as an actual character in Octo Expansion, so when they were here, I was confused, but I just rolled with it. And after some exposition, we have a new task of finding out what exactly Alterna is and saving Captain Cuttlefish, which, might I just add, Cuttlefish man, I love ya, but dude, you're going 3 for 3 on getting kidnapped. You really gotta watch yourself, man. And even though the format of Alterna still feels similar on paper, it vastly changes up a ton of things. Like for one, the levels. Overall, it's a nice mix of the levels we get in Splatoon 1 and 2 and the levels we get in Octo Expansion, with some of them having the act structure I talked about before and others being mini challenges or restrictions. The challenges reside in the silver kettles and all feel relatively unique from one another, and if they do copy something, they'll still find ways to surprise you, like the Spider-Man levels. This is the coolest shit ever, and I refuse to hear anything otherwise. And then you have the gold kettles, which are basically just get from point A to point B levels, but they work infinitely better here, since there's not as much to play through and do not take much of your time. Basically the complete opposite of Splatoon 2, which is a good thing. Other than that, the mechanics that are present elsewhere works the same here, with the currency, difficulty, and weapon picking all working the same way they did in Octo Expansion. Coming back to this almost 2 years later, I am a little less impressed with the array of levels we have here, since I finally played Octo Expansion and realized how it's not nearly as unique as I thought it was before. But it didn't make for any less of a good time. The ones I probably enjoyed most were the one where you couldn't touch any enemy ink, any level that involved a special, and levels that involved ink rails. Although, I'll never get used to how your character just stares at you after you complete every level.
The fuck did I do?
However, the real big change Splatoon 3 adds is how progressing from level to level works and the world map in general. Every island in this game is covered with brown ooze we saw from before, and by completing levels, you collect power orbs which are able to clear up the ooze, unlocking more levels and collectibles. Since instead of finding all the Sardiniums and sunken scrolls in levels like before, now all of that is hidden throughout the map, which I think is a convenient change. I didn't mention this before, but when I was playing levels of Splatoon 1 and 2, half the time I was trying to look absolutely everywhere to see if I forgot something. Since if I did miss a scroll somewhere, I had no way to go back to look for it unless I redo the level. But here the collectibles are segregated to the world map, so I can go ahead and focus on the level without having to worry about missing anything. Having to clear up all the fuzzy ooze is not only pretty rewarding, but also gives little buddy something to do. Since once you have enough orbs, he can spirit bomb an ooze patch into nothing. All in all, the world map is more engaging than ever before. With some unique designs that accompany them, they're almost as fun as the levels themselves. Now, despite everything I've just said about the world map and the levels, my favorite aspect to come out of this game is how it handled the bosses. And this time around, instead of a generic robot metal thing, this game has you facing off against the deep cut, Shiver, Fry, and my lord and savior, big man. Instead of the idols being all buddy-buddy and friendly like the past two games, here they are technically villains in the most non-threatening way possible. You meet them at the start of the game and they act all intimidating and in your face, but they honestly just come off as very cartoon-like. And the best part is, no one takes them seriously. Literally, Callie and Marie don't take notice to them at all as they monologue in front of you. This not only gets you attached to these characters, but also makes their boss fights a lot more entertaining since you're not just fighting some empty husk. But in general though, their respective fights are really good, all playing very differently from one another and providing a substantial amount of difficulty each. I especially love the big man boss, since it's literally just an homage to a Mario Sunshine boss and it works super well here. And my only big complaint about the deep cuts is that we don't get more of them. They only show up a handful of times but steal the spotlight every time they're on screen. They're basically the Splatoon equivalent of Team Rocket in the best way possible. And if you're curious, this is how all the idols rank on my list. So after defeating all of them and creating this thing, I couldn't really tell you what this is honestly, we're able to go off to the final island and ascend this very tall structure. And just like Octo Expansion, it's a huge gauntlet of challenges and enemies, which is still pretty fun, but it borrows a lot of elements from that, so I wish it was a bit more original. However, during your climb up, you're able to overhear Captain Cuttlefish as he speaks with the one behind his kidnapping and all the weird ooze stuff, Mr. Grizz. And let me just say, when I first played this, I found it so interesting because I had zero clue as to what he's supposed to be. Like, I know he's your manager in Salmon Run and all, but I was genuinely stumped on whether Mr. Grizz was a squid or an Octarian or something else altogether. And as we finally get to the top of the structure, we get the shocking revelation of Mr. Grizz, as he turns out to be a bear. You know, cause grizzly bear. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, huh? As he reveals his plan to ride a rocket ship into space and cover the entire world in fuzzy ooze. And also, Cuttlefish is dead. And in order to stop him, the deep cut sends us off to outer space for one final epic space battle. And while I was a little disappointed with Octo Expansion's climax, here it couldn't have been any better. Every good video game series has one epic space battle, which is why the Zelda series sucks. And this battle is so wildly different to everything that came before it. And thankfully, all of this isn't just for show. As you progress, the terrain becomes more cluttered, and trying to avoid all the fuzzy ooze and Mr. Grizz's attacks got me stuck a couple of times. This fight resembles a lot of your first run-in with DJ Octavio, but on a much bigger scale. And Mr. Grizz having a funny personality and interesting design makes it very entertaining. However, there is still one more phase to this boss. Mr. Grizz's power proves to be too much and he grows even stronger. And when all hope seems lost, DJ Octavio shows up and Lil Buddy turns into Big Buddy and we get a baller kaiju fight as you suck on Mr. Grizz until he's dry. Yeah, let me say that one more time. We get a baller kaiju fight as you suck on Mr. Grizz until he's dry. What I love most about this sequence though is how it's a group effort. Even though we as the main character do a lot of the work, none of this would have been possible without the help of Lil Buddy, Octavio, and everyone else that's gotten us this far. And with one last hurrah, you're able to take down Mr. Grizz and save the world yet again. And man, I got a ton of praises for Splatoon 3. It is able to take the best parts of what came before and improved upon it, with a world map that is almost as engaging as the levels and a narrative that'll have you laughing the entire time. Although I wish more levels had a unique edge to it like we saw in Octo Expansion, and a couple more story beats and a few more bosses to fight, it is a great experience from the base game. And with that, I'm gonna fill the glass. Fine, I'll talk about after Alterna. So instead of a secret boss at the end of the campaign like Octo Expansion, we get a secret level instead, being much longer than everything else and pushing the level creativity and difficulty to its max. I found this level pretty hard the first time around, so I didn't know if it'll still be like that or a walk in the park. Yeah, no, it's still hard. Some sections are definitely easier than others though. Like the first one doesn't have you doing anything super difficult, but you have to be consistent, since if you die anytime within the first 5 or so minutes, you'll have to start back in the beginning. Although for the second section, it was a lot easier than I remembered, literally getting by it on my first try. And the next two don't seem difficult, but if you make any error, you'll most likely die. But by far the most annoying part out of all this was the last section, which is basically just a souped up version of Girl Power Station, which is notoriously known as the hardest level in Octo Expansion, and the specials and weapons flying everywhere truly reminds me of my nightmares I faced previously. So in short, After Alterna is everything I wanted it to be, and a good stand-in for what the Hero Within was from before. I definitely say I prefer the former, just because After Alterna just feels like one big giant level, while the Hero Within encapsulated everything Octo Expansion was trying to do. But both campaigns end on a high note either way, and that's basically how I feel about Splatoon 3's campaign. It absolutely floors Splatoon 1 and 2, but I have a really hard time saying whether or not I like it more than Octo Expansion. So with that being said, it's going to get a score on par with that of the DLC. And with that all wrapped up, it's time to move on to the final and most recent campaign. So after playing all 4 campaigns in a row, I had no idea what to expect from Side Order. I feel like the developers did everything they can with Octo Expansion and Splatoon 3, and there was nothing more Side Order could add without retreading its tracks. So after going into it with the only information I know that it was gonna be a roguelike, I was curious to see how much this would change up and if this risk would pan out and be worth the $35 price tag. And I've played a ton of roguelikes before, like that one time I played Hades at my friend's house for 30 minutes, and yeah, that's pretty much my whole experience. So to say I was very confused and a little weirded out when I started the first couple minutes of Side Order is an understatement. Since once you start it, you're given the information that Inkopolis Square is covered in snow, off DLC Hook is here, but Pearl is a robot, and we meet this weird green Octarian who says we gotta ascend the 10 floors to save Marina. It was a lot to take in, and the plot felt a little all over the place since apparently all this isn't really real, but it is real, and people are turning into these weird blob things, and Order, who's like the big main villain, was made by Marina, but Marina didn't want to make him and wanted to make something else entirely. It had me lost for a while there. Overall, the first thing I noticed about Side Order is how visually distinct it looks compared to everything that came before. Yes, the graphics are the complete same to Splatoon 3, but everything has such a monotone look to it. The arenas are primarily colored gray. The structures don't have any wacky feel to them and are mostly made up of rectangles and squares. And the enemies, which by the way, thank God we don't get the standard Octarian enemies anymore, that was getting really repetitive, are all colored black and have no signs of personality or fun feel to them. Side Order feels like a futuristic but boring outlook of the Splatoon world, which is exactly what the series needed since all the campaigns felt relatively the same looks-wise every time. So as you enter the building, you're given the mission to ascend the tower and complete each floor until you get to floor 10, in which you'll find Marina. And here's where I thought we would have gotten those traditional Splatoon levels, but instead we got something entirely different. For one, we see what the entire stage will look like as soon as we get in, and also we have no beginning and end point, and instead we have to complete some sort of operation. At first, I didn't really understand what to make of it, since the gameplay just felt a lot of the same thing. Do a mission, complete it, go up a floor, and repeat. And at first, it really worried me, because when I get farther in, I could get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. There's also these chips you get after every stage, and they seemingly give you some sort of enhancements here and there, but it felt unnecessary since the floors had little to no difficulty. I was still having a decent time, but I was worried as to if only playing through level after level could keep me entertained the entire way through. So it wasn't until I reached the final floor that I started to understand the point of Side Order, as we bear witness to a creepy looking Marina as we try to free her. And once we do, we're introduced to the big bad of the DLC, Order, as he shoots us out of the tower, and only then do we truly start the DLC and I start to really warm up to the gameplay. The campaign is still a basic roguelike in which you have to complete floor after floor before getting to the end, and if you die at any point, it'll take you all the way back to the beginning. And like I said before, I thought it would get unoriginal real quick, but everything around Side Order makes it so good. Each floor has you choose between 3 different levels, which range between 5 different types of operations. First up is portals, in which you must destroy every orb the enemies spawn from. Next up is 8-ball, in which you must guide these spheres to their destination without enemies interrupting you. Manhunt has you chase these fast guys as you try to splat them while they run away from you. And the other 2 ones are basically just splat zones and tower control, but with less steps. Having 5 different types definitely makes Side Order never feel boring, since you'll never be doing the same task again and again. And as we ascend the tower, slowly more restrictions will be added, like not being able to use your specials, having every light completely turned off, or just not being able to use your main weapon at all. But the harder the challenge, the more rewards you get, since you achieve 2 things from clearing floors, which are chips and mem currency. I talked about before how chips felt kinda unnecessary since the floors were so easy, but that was only regarding the tutorial. Here, you need the best chips possible. Before you enter a floor, you get a clear description of what the chip you get will do. Whether it increases ink, damage, speed, or dozens of other upgrades, you need to tactically increase the correct utility in order to go up the tower. Which is why I kept upgrading my damage and radius output whenever I could to deal with the onslaught of enemies later on. And by the way, you will die a lot in Side Order. By the time you reach floor 20, the challenges will get a lot more complex and they will throw enemies at you left and right. So no matter what, you will die a lot in the DLC. But unlike real life, you actually want to die in this game. Unless you're really depressed or something, I don't know. Since once you get back to the base, you're able to treat yourself to a bunch of upgrades. Using your earnings from your runs, you can go back to Marina and you'll be able to boost on numerous amount of mechanics as long as you have enough pearls. There are a whole lot of options to choose for yourself or for Pearl, since she will play a vital role in trying to clear all 30 floors. She's basically Lil Buddy 2.0, since she will provide help in ways of splatting enemies and even doing a lot of the heavy lifting, as she's able to spray ink or drop bombs as long as you have the correct chips. She's also just a very fun character to have around as you try to complete your tasks. However, Lil Buddy is still better. I'm sorry, I'll make the rules up. Going into the tower and getting as far as you can before dying is the lifeblood of Side Order. And the farther you get, the more prizes you receive, especially if you beat the bosses. There's a total of 3 different bosses you come across in Side Order, being Tornado Guy, Ball Guy, and lots of guys. And they're all pretty decent. Again, I like how they look very different from the bosses we typically get, and it's fun trying to beat them in quicker fashion every time you see them. I kinda wish we got 1 or 2 more floor bosses to fight, since it does get a little tiring beating them over and over again, but either way, I'm satisfied with what we got. And from these bosses, we get keys, in which they can open the lockers that are found at the base. And once we unlock them, we can find more pearls to use, Marina's diary entries, which are a fun insight to Marina's life, and also a brand new palette. And this relates to my only real gripe of the game, which is how weapon distribution works. So you'll start off with dapple dualies, but once you get some keys, you might be able to unlock more weapons to use. But this process is totally random. Once you unlock it, you have no choice as to what weapon you'll get, and it'll most likely not work in your favor. Just imagine going into a tower and spending a good 30 to 60 minutes clearing floors to get keys, and then dying to only unlock a splatter shot out of it. And if you want to get the weapon you actually want, you gotta do the entire process again just for the slim chance you'll get the weapon you want. The only positive you'll get out of this is the opportunity to try a new weapon you haven't used before. I personally never used the Katana or Luna Blaster before, but now I really like them because those are the 2 weapons I got the farthest with. But then again, I'd still much rather prefer having the option to choose a palette once getting the right number of keys. Like, instead of it being random, you open a locker and it gives you the choice of choosing between a couple of palettes. This would give the player more free will and not leave it to the hands of the game. Because no Splatoon, no matter how many times you ask, I'm not going to use the mini Gatling. I fucking hate it. But other than that, the process of going inside the tower and repeatedly beating floors and losing might sound bad on paper, but in execution, it makes for one of the biggest strengths of Side Order that no other Splatoon campaign can compare to, which is how addicting and replayable it is. Going floor to floor can be so exhilarating, since once you get good enough, you're able to complete them faster and faster. The challenges and arenas can all range, but even the harder floors can be completed in under a minute if you're that good. And it feels so rewarding to get more overpowered with each run, since you're constantly improving yourself with upgrades and different tactics that you've learned from previous playthroughs. And figuring out which enemies are more dangerous or which specials are more valuable are part of what makes ascending the tower so much fun. Side Order is one of those campaigns where you boot it up around 8 p.m. and before you know it, it's 3 in the morning. No other campaign provides the replay value that this does, since before, once you complete a level, there's no real reason to go back to it unless you really want to find all the sunken scrolls. But if you enjoy Side Order that much, there's a bunch of reasons to go back to it once you complete the main story. Whether to unlock all the lockers, to fully upgrade yourself, to get all the collectibles, or to challenge yourself in ways you couldn't before, Side Order will have you coming back endlessly if you really want to. And even though I haven't really played a roguelike before, this was a great introduction, and it reminds me of one of my favorite childhood games, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, in which you'll have an area with a ton of floors that has tasks for you to do. And it genuinely surprises me how well Splatoon's gameplay was able to translate into a genre like this. So one thing I questioned how Side Order would handle was its ending. Ascending all 30 floors came with a bunch of difficulties on its own, but will getting to the top really feel worth it? And once I did, we're met face to face with Order himself, who turns into a creepy, modern day looking octopus who fits the exact tone Side Order was trying to replicate. And the boss itself is pretty good. I can talk all I want about what makes it so hard, or how exactly you beat it, but I think fighting Order puts into perspective how far the Splatoon series has come. Not even a decade ago, the franchise was only about the ongoing feud between the Octarians and Squids and how you get to fight a DJ by the end of it, which is still enjoyable, but as the series evolves, the stakes and the narratives become so much more than that. What it means to be an Octarian, reviving a long lost race, or even now with the campaign revolving around how awful it would be if everything and everyone has no free will, and what would it feel to live like that. Now, even though I'm saying all this, it's not like Splatoon has become some super deep and thought-provoking series. No, it's still about painting shit around you. But it does help the franchise become a lot more complex as a result. And this fight with Order, and especially the second phase, really put that into perspective. As all hope seems lost for the world, until the power of music and chaos help bring down Order in a very cool and spectacular scene, thus stopping them and saving the world once again, as you, Pearl, Marina, and Acht? Ackett? I never knew how to pronounce her name. Ride down the elevator from the top as the credits roll by. And it was here I did not know how to rank Side Order. Like, I loved it for sure, but it's just so different from everything else that came before it. There's no real level system, and it was clearly made to be replayed a lot more than previous campaigns. Maybe I need more time to sit on it as it just came out, but I think I have it slightly below Splatoon 3 and a little higher than Octo Expansion. But again, that could likely change in the future. But as it stands, I think it also sits around the 8.5 mark on the glass. But even with all that said, no matter how you slice it, Splatoon will forever be an online multiplayer game. Everyone who buys it knows the bulk of their time is going to be spent online, playing online ranked matches for hours. But to me, Splatoon is so much more than that. It has such an expansive and wondrous world, filled with likable characters and a style of gameplay that's amongst the best I've ever seen. And that gameplay can work so goddamn well in a single player format, seeing how it evolved from the start from just typical get to point A to point B levels to changing genres entirely. I don't know where the series can possibly go from here, since it feels like they've explored every avenue, but I know the series is in good hands. Some campaigns are way better than others, but I had a very fun time with all of them. So when Splatoon 4 inevitably comes out in a couple years, I'll be most excited to see what the campaign has to offer. Unless it's like Splatoon 2, in that case I don't want it.